AIDS brings a response
Fight
from the
against
government.
AIDS, the disease which claims lives.
Welcome to AIDS: The Lost Voices with me, William Hampson. In this series, we journey through the decades to explore how Britain reported on the AIDS pandemic. We'll delve into the newspaper archives from the 80s, 90s and noughties, unearthing individual stories that reveal the human experiences behind the headlines. Join me as we seek to understand the complexities of a crisis that reshaped lives and challenged societal perceptions. Ready? Let's go. In the previous episode, we covered the appalling dismissal of Todd Shuttleworth in 1984 when his employer, the local county in Florida, America, discovered his HIV/AIDS diagnosis. Unwilling to accept his unjust treatment, Todd courageously opted for public identification and took legal action against his employer. At a time when misinformation and stigma surrounded the disease, his decision to stand up for his rights was a pioneering move that resonated deeply within the community. Todd's case not only highlighted the discrimination faced by individuals living with HIV/AIDS, but also served as a catalyst for change, paving the way for future generations both in his native America and even here in the UK, who face similar situations in the workplace because of their HIV/AIDS diagnosis, or as we'll learn in this episode, merely their sexuality believed to be associated with HIV/AIDS. Bonkers, I know. And for those of you that follow me on Instagram, at The Lost Boys of Soho, you will know that this episode discussing employment dismissals as a consequence of HIV/AIDS here in the UK is delayed by a week. Sadly, I am in the process of taking my current employer to an employment tribunal for HIV/AIDS discrimination. I recorded this episode on Tuesday the 22nd of April 2025, but the following day, my in-home CCTV captured me experiencing two transient ischemic attacks, given the acronym TIAs, commonly known as mini strokes. Afraid and concerned, and despite the English stiff upper lip, I was rushed to hospital and was diagnosed with cerebral ischemic attack, which I think is just a poncy posh word for TIA. And this was supported by the symptoms I experienced, along with proteins that were clearly visible in my blood tests. The doctors indicated that the likely cause was, quote, prolonged work-related stress, end quote, as my employer continues to subject me to harassment, victimization, and both verbal and physical assaults. One colleague who on several occasions punched me in the arm even shouted, "All gays have AIDS," and later claimed that, quote, working with someone who's got AIDS is like working on death row, end quote. My employer, a major pub company in the UK, has refused to address these matters through their grievance process, making it difficult and refusing to make very reasonable adjustments in light of my HIV/AIDS disability, which will now be presented to the tribunal as a continuation of my claim. With this health scare, which, had it been a lot worse, could have ended my life, I'll now, from next week, be spilling the tea on my claim as I start to serialise my employment tribunal experience in a series titled Grievance to Grave. This journey has been fraught with challenges, and the unwillingness of my employer to engage with the established procedures has only heightened my resolve. Each instalment will delve into the intricacies of the issues faced, the responses or lack thereof from management, and the emotional toll of navigating this complex landscape. By sharing my story, before I drop down dead of another stroke or heart attack, I aim to shed light on the often overlooked and sometimes hidden realities of workplace HIV/AIDS discrimination in the pursuit of justice within the employment sector. This reality is highlighted over the last 4 decades by several high-profile claims that have come to public attention in the UK, and certainly inspire me. So, let's take a look.
Last week we reported that the single scene may be the source of heterosexual infection.
So, this first set of articles came as a result of this Thames television footage that was recorded in a restaurant in Soho, London in 1986. So, let's take a listen.
Statistics say most young people will have several sex partners in their 20s. Could today's liberated generation find it realistic to stick with one partner for life?
I think it's impossible to do that in. I don't think people can stay together for 40 years.
Well, I feel that it's quite easy to be monogamous, but it's always dependent on what your partner's doing, and that's the frightening thing.
If you stay with the same person the whole time, it's probably true, but that's very, very boring.
And as a result, the London's Evening Standard newspaper on the 17th of March 1987 ran the headline, "Manager Sacked Unfairly," where they report, "The manager of a restaurant whose clients include rock and film stars was unfairly dismissed after he allowed customers to be interviewed on TV about AIDS, a tribunal ruled today. Mr. Christopher Ward, chairman of the Chelsea Tribunal, told Soho Brasserie owners, Vittle Inns, to agree a maximum compensation payment of more than £8,000 to former manager Andrew Peters. The panel also ruled that 28-year-old Mr. Peters, who was in charge when the Soho Brasserie was elected Brasserie of the Year by the Times food critic, was treated shabbily by his bosses. Despite having worked for the company for almost 2 years, he was sacked summarily and given just 1 hour in which to appeal. Mr. Peters of Donaldson Road, Kilburn, was dismissed for gross misconduct on October the 16th last year for allowing Thames Television to conduct a vox pop among youngsters drinking at the bar. Mrs. Debbie Mason, press officer to the company, claimed that the interview could have caused embarrassment to customers. She told the tribunal that, quote, "Their indiscretion may have been caught on film. You never know who customers are with." Mr. David Fothergill, representing Vittle Inns, claimed Mr. Peters, quote, "flagrantly breached," end quote, company policy. During his disciplinary hearing, Mr. Peters maintained, quote, "My dismissal is an excuse. Nobody wants to be associated with AIDS. I have been made a scapegoat." Oh, do you know, absolute madness, but there was no indication whether Mr. Peters, the restaurant manager, was gay or straight, and does it really matter? Because either way, being a 28-year-old, he had an interest in raising awareness around AIDS, given, regardless of his own sexuality, AIDS had potential and did affect and infect many regardless of sexuality or sex. And as we heard in that footage from Thames Television, was no doubt pitched to Mr. Peters as just seeking opinion on those enjoying Soho's nightlife and their own awareness around HIV and AIDS within that setting. Anyhow, this story was also reported the following day in the Independent newspaper, but good on Mr. Peters for standing his ground and winning his claim. And I note from the newspaper archives that Mr. Peters did go on to manage many prominent restaurants after this absolute hideous and unnecessary ordeal.
The virus can be passed during sexual intercourse with an infected person. Anyone can get it, man or woman. If you ignore AIDS, it could be the death of you. So don't die of ignorance.
Then, in another case at the end of the same year, 1987, the Independent newspaper on the 21st of December 1987 ran the headline, "Gay Rights Test Over Sacking," where they report, trade union lawyers plan to turn the case of a gay cinema projectionist sacked when his colleagues claimed he was an AIDS risk into a homosexual rights test case. The Broadcasting and Entertainment Trades Alliance will appeal next month against an industrial tribunal's decision to uphold the dismissal of Michael Buck, who worked in Letchworth, Hertfordshire. He lost his case even though there was no evidence that he had been infected with AIDS. So, that article gives us the tail end of the employment tribunal really, which is Michael has made a claim and it's not been upheld. However, to give you a little bit of background information, I can share that Michael Buck was a dedicated cinema projectionist at Letchworth for 17 years. He finds himself the target of prejudice as the emergence of AIDS and, as we discussed in a previous episode, APES, AIDS-induced panic syndrome, stirring fear amongst his colleagues at the cinema. Although openly gay, Michael has never tested positive for HIV, yet irrational anxieties lead one co-worker to take the alarming step of disinfecting door handles that both he and Michael frequently use. This bizarre, if not disgusting and unjust treatment culminates in a claim against the workplace for, surprisingly, discrimination, which the Employment Tribunal initially dismisses, as we just heard. Undeterred, Michael appeals the decision, challenging the atmosphere of stigma and reinforcing his right to work without fear. God, don't I know what that feels like at the minute. Anyway, back to Michael. This next article will delve into the outcome of Michael's appeal, which the Western Daily Press reported on the 16th of February 1988 under the headline, AIDS Scare, Gay Wins Job Battle. A homosexual who claimed he was sacked because fellow workers were afraid of catching AIDS has won his legal fight against wrongful dismissal. Former cinema projectionist Michael Buck, aged 45, accepted £2,000, That's the equivalent of £5,485 as of 2025, according to the Bank of England. £2,000 damages in an out-of-court settlement. Yesterday, after his appeal in London was formally allowed on undisclosed settlement terms, Mr. Buck said he had not wanted his job back at the small cinema at Letchworth, Hertfordshire, where he had worked for 17 years. Quote, "Everyone knew for years that I was gay, but I bear no grudges." End quote. His sacking in November 1986 from the Letchworth Palace and an industrial tribunal's dismissal of his wrongful dismissal case brought an outcry from gay activists. Mr. Buck went to live in Yorkshire and is still out of work. Quote, "I haven't stopped looking," he said. Mr. Buck's appeal was against the industrial tribunal finding last March in favour of the employers, Letchworth Palace Limited. Yesterday, their counsel, Mr. Alan Wilkie, told Mr. Justice Popplewell and two lay judges that the appeal had been allowed on, quote, "terms endorsed on counsel's brief," end quote. The phrase used by lawyers when they or their clients do not wish to disclose anything. Mr. Justice Popplewell said he understood a point was involved about AIDS. Mr. Wilkie said, quote, "The point of principle is the conduct of the employer over the spread of AIDS, whether it can be reasonable for an employer to dismiss." End quote. In Mr. Buck's pleaded case, his lawyers submitted that the industrial tribunal had, quote, "erred in law in holding that because the appealant was a homosexual, that other employees were justified in refusing to work with him." End quote. Oh man. So they're basically saying that because the employees knew he was a homosexual, they had a right to just assume that he had AIDS as well, and they were trying to protect themselves. Oh, isn't it ridiculous? Sharon Elliott, spokesman for Mr. Buck's trade union, the Broadcasting and Entertainment Trades Alliance, who backed his case, said Mr. Buck had received £2,000, quote, "But the most important thing is that our position that he was dismissed unfairly has been vindicated," she said. So, there you have it. Michael didn't have HIV/AIDS and was merely dismissed on the grounds of being gay, with the unfounded suspicion of having and or transmitting the AIDS virus despite, to use an 80s term, despite not being a carrier. Oh, isn't it ridiculous? What were these people sniffing? Anyhow, thankfully, Michael won his claim, yet after 17 years at the cinema, I can't help but wonder about the complex mixture of emotions he must have experienced. While he likely enjoyed his job, perhaps there was a hidden relief in being nudged towards new beginnings in Harrogate, a picturesque part of Yorkshire where he could pursue fresh opportunities. The change might have presented him with a chance to start anew, leaving behind the stigma that had clouded his tenure at the cinema. I conducted a soft search for Michael Buck, but have yet to determine where his life has taken him since that pivotal moment. So, Michael, if you're out there, first, congratulations and well done. Absolutely sorry that you had to endure such, but gosh, drop us a line, let us know how you're doing.
The first of 24 patients with full-blown AIDS arrived today, but the London Lighthouse is also a support centre. Some of its 85 staff themselves have the illness.
Now, this next set of articles may invoke discomfort for some, they do me, as they delve into the London Lighthouse, a significant institution for individuals living with HIV/AIDS that closed in 2013. Once the largest centre of its kind in the world, the London Lighthouse was instrumental in pioneering a patient-centred approach to HIV care, offering not only a residential unit but also day care and drop-in facilities that provided essential support. The organisation is remembered fondly for its compassionate end-of-life care, which allowed many to experience their final days with grace and dignity. However, it is important to acknowledge the internal challenges it faced over the years, particularly relating to the removal or dismissal of staff members, some of whom were also living with HIV/AIDS. This facet of the institution's history prompts a critical reflection on the complexities within supportive environments and the nuances of care provision during troubling times. The Independent newspaper was the one to break this story on the 6th of January 1991, where they ran the headline, "AIDS charity in cash row over staff payments," where they report, a charity which cares for people with AIDS and the virus HIV, and which boasts of its record of employing them, has paid out £2,000, the equivalent of £4,500 as of 2025, £2,000 in damages for sacking a worker with full-blown AIDS because he was 2 weeks behind with his work. The charity has also been attacked for paying more than £50,000, the equivalent of £113,000 as of 2025, from money donated to help people with AIDS to get rid of staff allegedly because they challenged the autocratic style of the director. Disgruntled former employees and a senior insider have criticised the way staff have been treated, in contrast to the charity's caring public image. They say it lacks a policy for dealing with staff with AIDS. 8 original managers have been sacked, paid off or resigned in the last 2 years, allegedly because of the dictatorial behaviour of the director and founder, Christopher Spence. London Lighthouse, which runs a residential centre and hospice for the terminally ill in Notting Hill, West London, employs 150 people and had an income of £3.3 million last year, 65% of it from public funds. It prides itself on being a, quote, loving, respectful and non-oppressive place of safety for people affected by AIDS, end quote. It actively recruits people with the virus, stating in job advertisements, quote, we would particularly welcome applications from people with HIV and AIDS, end quote. But 35-year-old Andrew Fay, who was diagnosed as having AIDS 2 years ago, was sacked from his probationary post as a publications and information officer for failing to meet work targets. Although he had agreed the targets, Mr. Fay protested that his medical condition had not been taken into account. He was taking the drug AZT, which led to bouts of anemia, and he needed blood transfusions once a month. A management committee recommended his reinstatement, saying he had been, quote, inappropriately dismissed, and that insufficient account was taken of his health status, end quote. Mr. Fay was informed in writing that this decision would be final, but after the director's intervention, Christopher Spence, it was overruled by the full Council of Management. Mr. Fay's lawyers advised him to sue for breach of contract, but minutes before the case was due to be heard in the High Court last month, the charity offered him damages and costs. Mr. Fay's case is not an isolated one, but it has prompted other ex-employees and an insider to make public their concerns about alleged inadequacies and injustices within the organisation. Set up in 1988, London Lighthouse is one of the highest profile AIDS charities, with influential supporters such as the actor Sir Ian McKellen. The Council of Management, who we heard of earlier, includes Margaret Jay, a director of the National AIDS Trust, Rabbi Julia Neumberger, and Baroness Masham, spokesman on disability in the House of Lords. Critics stress the quality of care and services provided at the 24-bed residential centre, which is used by 500 people, and the counselling and support services in the community. They were reluctant to risk jeopardising the project, but spoke out in the hope that changes would be made in management procedures. A personnel officer, Neil Sheringham, was offered the choice of resignation or the sack last August after being accused of incompetence and failure to perform a number of tasks, charges he categorically denies. He opted for resignation and a payoff of £5,800, the equivalent of £13,100 as of 2025, rather than a fight. Mr. Sheringham, 33, claims he was forced out because he, like others who left or were sacked, clashed with Mr. Spence, who would not tolerate dissent. He says he tried in vain to introduce written policies on how to treat staff with AIDS or HIV and on equal opportunities. Ironically, Mr. Sheringham had also criticised the way other staff had been either dismissed or, quote, bought off, end quote, with money intended to help people with AIDS or HIV. One man was paid £25,000, the equivalent of £56,600 as of 2025, and 2 women £12,000 each, £12,000 being the equivalent of £27,191 as of 2025. Gosh, this is sums of money that HIV/AIDS charities would die for today, and they spent this on getting rid of free employees. It's just madness. Anyhow, stick to the story. So, Neil Sheringham continues. He said, quote, the way the procedures were changed in Andrew Fay's case almost at the whim of the director, was appalling, end quote. Oh. Jeff Warburton, the charity's press officer, refused to comment on Mr. Fair's case or the policy of paying off staff because, he said, all personnel matters were confidential. But he said, quote, from the conception of London Lighthouse, people with HIV and AIDS have been central to the work and the project, and we have developed good working practices for employing people with AIDS, end quote. Answering criticism of the management style, Mr. Warburton said, quote, the director makes recommendations to the Council of Management, but ultimate power rests with them. Christopher, as in Christopher Spence, welcomes it if anyone wants to talk to him. Most people comment on his accessibility, end quote. Mr. Spence was not available for comment. Isn't that a shocker? Then it will come as no surprise that 4 days later, the story appears on the front page of the Kensington and Chelsea newspaper, where on the 10th of January 1991, they ran the front page headline, Payoffs Row at AIDS Centre, where they offer this additional insight. The AIDS hospice, London Lighthouse, has clammed up over claims that it, quote, bought off, end quote, employees with money donated for victims of the disease. But the Lancaster Road charity, set up in 1988, was this week refusing to comment on the alleged buy-offs. It said in a short statement that the reports did, quote, less than justice to the context in which London Lighthouse was founded, end quote. It praised Mr. Spence for acting, quote, in full consultation, end quote, with the Management Council and seeking professional advice on severance terms, quote, consistent with the best employment practice, end quote. Sounds like he's trying to pass the buck. Many people with HIV and AIDS were happily employed in the project, and the management approach, quote, drew the best thinking, end quote, of all the workers. But 33-year-old Neil Sheringham, dismissed last August for alleged incompetence, told the News that some staff resented the despotic style of founder and director Christopher Spence. He said, quote, you have to toe the line and share his vision, end quote. Mr. Sheringham said he received a £5,800 payoff. Mr. Fair, that's Andrew Fair, Mr. Fair said, quote, I think I have been very badly treated by the organisation. It ought to practice what it preaches, end quote. Oh, it's getting messy. Then, 3 days later, on the 13th of January 1991, the Independent newspaper ran the headline, AIDS charities face widespread collapse. Now, they report on the Sussex AIDS Centre firing 16 staff despite it to be in receipt of an additional funding grant. But in regards to this story around London Lighthouse, the Independent newspaper gives us this additional insight. There have been controversies about internal strife and the raising and use of charity funds in several high-profile AIDS charities, including the Terence Higgins Trust, Frontliners, and London Lighthouse, which runs a hospice for the terminally ill. Last week, The Independent on Sunday revealed complaints about the way Lighthouse Project was run. There was no criticism about the services it provides for people with AIDS. Some former staff claimed that although the charity boasted of its records of employing people with AIDS and HIV, it did not treat them sympathetically. They also questioned the payment of large sums of money donated to help people with the virus, allegedly to get rid of staff, some of whom challenged the, quote, autocratic, end quote, style of its director. Michael Howard, a member of the Council of Management and a trustee who has AIDS, said he was, quote, livid, end quote, when he heard about the payoffs. At a committee meeting on Monday, he questioned the director, Christopher Spence, who said the payments had been authorised by the chairs of the council and relevant committees. Mr. Spence last week denied the charity had paid out more than £50,000, which was the equivalent of £113,000 as of 2025, as The Independent on Sunday reported. He said it had paid out £29,000, the equivalent in 2025 of £65,711.88, to 5 people over 5 years. He told Mr. Howard that an extra sum had been paid to one former employee from, quote, private sources, end quote. Private sources. Mr. Howard is to ask further questions about the payoffs and decision-making procedures at the February meeting of the Council of Management. Oh, go Mr. Howard, who was quoted as being, quote, livid at what was going on. While the London Lighthouse have made brief comments here and there, and Mr. Spence, the director, not making himself available for comment when the Independent sought one, a few pages on in the same newspaper, we hear from the London Lighthouse where the Independent, under the headline, AIDS charities provide high-quality services despite enormous problems, where they print the two following letters. The first from Jonathan Grimshaw, MBE. Sir, the management of several AIDS charities has been criticised in the press over the past few months, most recently that of London Lighthouse, 6th of January. AIDS charities were born in a climate of public health emergency, are very young and have to respond to rapid growth and change in demand without a concomitant growth in funding. Managing an AIDS charity is rather like managing a permanent crisis. Despite this, the services provided are almost universally acknowledged to be of a very high quality. Strenuous efforts are being made within the AIDS-related voluntary sector to improve management skills. The National AIDS Trust Management Training Initiative is an example. Those of us who manage AIDS charities have high expectations of ourselves and therefore create high expectations in others. Public scrutiny is entirely proper, but when expectations are not met, we would welcome an analysis undiminished by the tendency to sensationalise our difficulties. Jonathan Grimshaw, Trustee, the National AIDS Trust, London, SW2. I'm not too sure that you could accuse the Independent newspaper that broke this story as sensationalising the story. It just does seem to be that they were just printing facts, you know. They spoke to Andrew Fay, who was an employee there who was dismissed. They spoke to Neil Sheringham, who was the personnel officer, who was given the option to resign or be sacked, and he chose to resign and received a payoff as well. And the second letter, which I think you will be able to determine what the purpose of these letters are, is from Mr. Tony Chard and others. Sir, we write in response to the article by Rosie Waterhouse, quote, AIDS charity in cash row over staff payments, end quote. That was the headline. We are just some of the people living with HIV and AIDS at London Lighthouse. We work at different levels within the organisation and each area of the project's activities. London Lighthouse has always provided us with a very safe, supportive and caring environment in which to work. Our experience of the director, Christopher Spence, is that he is untraditionally accessible, understanding and open to ideas. Because of the present social climate, some of us have signed this letter in pseudonyms. We do not have to do this at London Lighthouse, which offers us opportunities not yet available elsewhere. It is a remarkable project of which we are very proud. And the letter is signed under these pseudonyms: Tony Chard, Derek Fraser, Robert Garcia, Ivy Hamilton, Oliver Britton, Richard Harper, Karen Richardson, Stephen Smith, Adrian Brown, Susan Kerry and D. Raymond. London Lighthouse, London W11. Then, by the 20th of January 1991, we hear, eventually, from the director of London Lighthouse, Christopher Spence, where the Independent, who, is accused of sensationalising this story, print a letter he has sent them, which they print under the headline, The Source of London Lighthouse Staff Payoffs, where the letter states, Sir, the allegations in Rosie Waterhouse articles, 6th and 13th of January, concern 5 former employees with whom London Lighthouse agreed severance terms. These cases were spread over 5 financial years. 3 of the 5 were dismissed. 2 accepted redundancy because of reorganisation. As a result, far from being an autocracy, senior management was enlarged to include 3 assistant directors in addition to myself. The total sum involved in all 5 cases was £29,139, which, as we heard earlier, was the equivalent of £65,711 as of 2025, which, on top of a cumulative salaries total of £4,783,394, represents 0.61%. All payments were met from slippage on the salaries budget in the particular year in question, and no money donated for other purposes was ever used in this way. All decisions were taken with the approval of the chairs of the Council of Management and the Staff and Salaries Subcommittee with professional advice and the knowledge of particular funders. Within the AIDS sector, we welcome discussion about how we can continue to develop our capacity to manage organisations which are still having to grow extremely fast in response to a public health emergency. In 1988, I invited the Industrial Society to scrutinise London Lighthouse's management style and structure, and to make recommendations for change which have now been put into effect. The report praised the unique achievement of the project in successfully, quote, compressing campaigning and organisational developments which more typically take 25 to 50 years into a tenth of that time, end quote, and in creating an environment to which everyone interviewed paid unsolicited tribute as, quote, the best place I have ever worked, end quote. Christopher Spence, Director, London Lighthouse, London W11. Oh, I mean, it all sounds very nice, but it still doesn't answer the question about Andrew Fair, who apparently had fallen about 2 weeks behind on his work because he was living with HIV/AIDS and he was on AZT, and we know how bad the side effects of AZT were that surely would have impacted his work. But regardless, however, we heard that they were trying to remove him, but was reinstated by this management committee. But Christopher Spence intervened and saw Andrew being dismissed from his role. So he's not really explaining that. What was the purpose behind that for him to do that to Andrew? It sounds malicious, but we actually hear within the same article, there's a letter from a Dr. Hugh Thomas Fair. This is Andrew's father, who's a doctor. He writes, Sir, when my son, Andrew Fair, agreed to be interviewed by Rosie Waterhouse when she was preparing the article on the problems of London Lighthouse, he had the courage to permit the use of his name. I feel, therefore, that the letter from Tony Chard and others, 13th of January, lacks integrity and credence in that some of the signatories have not dared to sign their own names. My own experience as the medical advisor to 2 large public companies and a major charity in the voluntary sector leads me to fear that there is a very serious defect in the personal management of London Lighthouse, leading to the infliction of distress on its employees and the diversion of funds obtained from the public and voluntary sectors away from the true purpose for which it was rightly funded. Hugh T. Fair, Stockport, Cheshire. Oh, and I can imagine for any child, they'd be like, oh God, Dad, you're so embarrassing, writing into the newspaper on my behalf. But actually, Dr. Fair's got a point, because Andrew must have looked at that letter that was printed and said, actually, Dad, I don't recognise any of these names, and they're claiming it's a pseudonym. And I think Dr. Fair makes a valid point. How do we know that this letter is genuine if it's signed by names that my son Andrew, who worked there, doesn't recognise and you claim to be pseudonyms, rather than them just holding their hands up and saying, hey, we got it wrong. And to a degree, we know they got it wrong, especially in the case of Andrew Fair, because as we heard, Andrew Fair had fallen about 2 weeks behind on his work. He was with an AIDS diagnosis, he's on AZT. They tried to get rid of him. But this management panel that Christopher Spence keeps referring to as always having the last word and everything being run through them and their say is final, they say Andrew shouldn't be let go, shouldn't be dismissed. He should be reinstated into his role. Yet, Christopher Spence intervenes, which sees Andrew Fair being dismissed. Oh, it's all just a bit mucky in my opinion. It's making my toes curl. Even now, and I wasn't there, and it doesn't involve me, but it's not a good look, is it? Anyhow, in a bid to find out more about Andrew and what happened to him next, I found that Andrew was in fact born Hugh Andrew Fair on the 20th of May 1955 in Manchester. He was the firstborn of Dr. Hugh Fair and Doreen Simpson. Choosing to adopt his middle name, Andrew, as his forename, he came to London early on to attend university and remained in London, making Hampstead in the borough of Camden his home. Turning 30, he now faced a new challenge following his HIV/AIDS diagnosis during a period steeped in stigma and misinformation. The societal pressures he faced echoed the experiences of many during the 1980s and 90s, where those living with AIDS were met with cruelty and misunderstanding, enduring repeated instances of ostracism and prejudice. His diagnosis became public in 1991 when he bravely challenged his unfair dismissal by the London Lighthouse in the High Court. Fast forward 2 years and it's now 1993, and Andrew's health is rapidly deteriorating. Andrew leveraged his situation to assist an investigative journalist in unveiling individuals who exploited vulnerable patients seeking treatment. This courage culminated in his appearance on the front page of the Greenford and Northolt Gazette, distributed in the Ealing area of West London on the 9th of April 1993, where he was instrumental in exposing a fraudulent doctor promoting a bogus AIDS cure, where the article states, "A bogus doctor who said she had a wonder drug which could cure AIDS has been found guilty of issuing a misleading advertisement. In a booklet sent to a North London gay pub, the Northolt woman claimed to have a wonder drug called Cancel, double L, or CH6, that would cure everything from cancer and AIDS to Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. But Elizabeth Marsh, 49 of Byron Road, who had denied the charge issued under the Medicines Act, was convicted at Isleworth Crown Court on Tuesday. Marsh, who ran the biomedical clinic in Greenford Road, Greenford, was remanded on bail for sentencing on May the 11th. Judge Simon Evans asked for reports on her current activities. She has a clinic in Northern Ireland. During the week-long trial, prosecutor David Ross said the defendant had no medical qualifications. He called her a, quote, fraud and a charlatan, end quote, and read long extracts from the booklet which he said, quote, contained dangerous nonsense and pseudo-scientific claptrap, end quote. An AIDS patient, Hugh Fay, acting for an investigative journalist, pretended to take part in tests for the wonder drug and was told he would be fit in 3 weeks. But he was too ill to attend court and his statement was read out. Speaking after the case, James Hutchinson of the Ministry of Agriculture, who investigated for the Department of Health, said cases like this were rare. He added, "It is very difficult to get evidence. The people who are patients at her clinic are people who are almost given up on. They are terminally ill. Many whom I spoke to did not wish to come forward because they felt she had given them some sort of hope. Some are already dead," end quote. Marsh made no comment as she left the court. Then, on the 28th of May 1993, the same newspaper, the Greenford and Northolt Gazette, ran the headline, AIDS quack is jailed, where they report, a bogus doctor who ran an alternative clinic in Greenford claiming she could cure everything from cancer to AIDS was jailed yesterday for misleading sick patients. She promptly collapsed on hearing the sentence at Isleworth Crown Court on Tuesday and had to be taken to hospital, a conventional one. Elizabeth Marsh, 49 of Byron Way, Northolt, ran the Biomedical Centre in Greenford Road and 2 clinics in Northern Ireland. At an earlier hearing, a jury found her guilty of issuing false statements between September 1990 and June 1991 about the powers of a substance called CH6 or Cancel, double L. She claimed it could cure AIDS. Jailing her for 6 months, Judge Simon Evans said he took a, quote, very serious view of the matter, end quote. At the earlier hearing, Mr. Ross described Marsh as a, quote, fraud and a charlatan, somebody who has no recognised medical conditions, end quote. A statement was also read from a dying AIDS patient, too ill to come to court. Hugh Andrew Fay, 37 of Hampstead, who attended the Greenford Clinic, was wrongly told he would be back to full health within 3 weeks. Now here's a name some people will recognise. Keir Starmer defending... Oh, God. How can... Do you know, it just amazes me how people who label themselves as HIV activists were schmoozing with this schmuck at 10 Downing Street for World AIDS Day when here he is defending somebody against victims of a crime regarding their HIV/AIDS status. It's just... Oh, anyway. It's on their conscience, not mine. Keir Starmer, defending, said Marsh, who suffered a nervous breakdown on the day of her conviction on April the 6th, had since spent some time in a psychiatric unit where she is still an outpatient. Oh, boo-hoo-hoo. I mean, why on earth should we feel any sympathy for someone who was clearly ripping off people not only living with HIV, but in the latter stages of AIDS with this false hope of a treatment or cure? I mean, come on, she's disgusting. And earlier in the trial, the Independent newspaper on the 6th of April 1993 reported the following. The booklet was sent with a covering letter to a homosexuals pub in Camden, North London in early 1991, asking for volunteers for clinical trials for the drug, which would be distributed free, although there would be an initial consultation charge of £95. which £95 in 1991 is the equivalent of £215 as of April 2025. But Keir Starmer, for the defence, said that this did not amount to a commercial interest in the product, which the prosecution needed to show to prove Miss Marsh's guilt. He said that even though Mrs. Marsh had contracted for 300 copies of the booklet to be printed in November 1990, the Crown had produced no evidence to show that she was responsible for its distribution. But even then, said Mr. Starmer, the booklet stated from the outset that it was a discussion document looking at possible cures for cancer. Oh, isn't it just cringing? Oh, I hate to bring it up again, but how you can schmooze with this knob jockey is beyond me. Ugh. And sadly, within days of that article, Hugh Andrew Fay sadly passed away as a result of AIDS-related complications. He was 38 years old.
Protesters, gay and lesbian rights activists in the public gallery began hurling abuse just as soon as the parents' rights groups began to voice their opposition to Haringey Council's policy of introducing a positive image for the homosexual community.
And in this final set of articles, in a continuing climate of rising tensions regarding workplace discrimination against the gay community, with the case surrounding Andrew Fay in 1991 setting a significant precedent for a gay man with HIV challenging his dismissal in the High Court, because by 1992 the issue arose again when a gay man dismissed from his position alleged that his firing was a direct consequence of both his sexuality and his HIV status. This prompted national attention, with the Sunday Telegraph on the 4th of October 1992 running the headline, "Gay Sacking Threatens to Land Council in Court." The article highlights the growing concerns regarding workplace discrimination against individuals based on sexual orientation and HIV status, underscoring the profound challenges faced by the gay community during a time of legal and social upheaval, where the article states, "A council renowned for its devotion to minority causes and equal opportunities is facing legal action after sacking a homosexual man with HIV, the virus that can lead to AIDS. Haringey in North London has been accused of homophobia and hypocrisy. It has also been accused of creating a hierarchy that gives certain, quote, disadvantaged, end quote, groups an advantage over others. David Morgan was dismissed from his job as a senior concierge at Newbury House, Wood Green, in July because Haringey said he had made excessive business phone calls and needed more supervision than others. The dismissal letter also said, quote, another matter of concern has been your working relationship with members of staff, such as black caretakers, end quote. Yet a personnel officer reporting on the dismissal found, quote, it has been established that there are no black caretakers covering Newbury House. However, this is a typing error and should read block caretakers. Quote, I have spoken to the caretakers concerned who say they have very little involvement with concierge staff, but during the course of their work, they have had a good relationship with Mr. Morgan, end quote. But there was a black man working with Mr. Morgan when he started last January. That man was suspended after being accused of making homophobic remarks to Mr. Morgan's colleagues. The allegations were found to be true, yet the man was reinstated. Then, after Mr. Morgan took a week off sick because of the strain surrounding the other man's disciplinary hearing, he contacted the Health and Welfare Officer, Haringey, after which his HIV status became known. In a review of his work, he was told that there had been an improvement, but he was not getting on well with some members of staff and that he was making too many phone calls dealing with repairs and tenants' problems. He was then dismissed. Since then, 70 tenants have petitioned the council asking for an independent inquiry into Mr. Morgan's sacking, and his team, with whom it has been alleged he did not get on well with, wrote saying that they had a good working relationship with him. Just months after passing a resolution complimenting itself on its, quote, positive and sympathetic attitude, end quote, towards people with HIV and AIDS, Haringey refused all requests to hold an inquiry into the dismissal. Quote, I am a Labour supporter, and I am loath to go to court against a Labour council, end quote, Mr. Morgan said. But I have lost my livelihood and my loyalty is stretched. A person found to have been homophobic was allowed back to work, but I lose my job. I think that it was to prevent complaints against senior officers being investigated, or because I am gay, HIV, Irish, or all three." End quote. Ron Aitken, chief whip of the Haringey Conservative group, said, quote, "If David Morgan was black, he would not have been sacked. The Labour leadership has assumed that there is no gay lobby, and they had calculated they would not lose votes." End quote. A Haringey spokesman said the council regarded the case as closed. I bet they did. And the next time we hear from David Morgan is 17 months later, where on the 1st of March 1994, The Guardian run the headline, "Positive Discrimination," with the strapline, "In the United States, sacked workers with the AIDS virus are taking employers to court. In Britain, they face a tougher battle." And alongside a photograph of David Morgan sat on a sofa in a suit looking stunned with his hands clasped on his knees, the article states, "The film Philadelphia brings sharply into focus the way AIDS sufferers and HIV-positive employees are treated in the workplace. Tom Hanks plays the part of a talented young gay lawyer groomed for stardom by a major law firm who finds himself brutally dismissed when his senior partners discover he has AIDS. They don't admit his illness was the reason for firing him. Instead, they find fault with his work. The ensuing courtroom drama centres on his battle to prove his dismissal was really motivated by prejudice, ignorance, and fear." Philadelphia reflects real-life cases in the United States where employees who are HIV positive or who have contracted AIDS are protected from discrimination under disability legislation. Publicity generated by the film looks certain to reinforce demands for similar legislation in the United Kingdom, where those who believe they have been victims of discrimination have only general employment protection legislation to fall back on. David Morgan worked for 4 months as a security supervisor for the London Borough of Haringey, but was fired in July 1992. Since then, he has been unable to find another job. Quote, "I firmly believe I was fired because I was gay and HIV positive. They accused me of a number of petty misdemeanours, just so that they had an excuse to get rid of me. I was actually in the room when a senior council employee said that she didn't like homosexuals or HIV positive people working there. And this is directly opposite their official publicly stated Equal Opportunities Employment Code, which claims not to discriminate." End quote. He cites numerous instances of harassment. Once he was beaten up when it was revealed that he was gay. Quote, "Haringey claimed that I was inappropriately overt about my sexuality. Because that is on my reference, it has prevented me getting another job. It's a slur on my character." End quote. Because 35-year-old Morgan had not worked for the statutory 2-year qualifying period for employment protection, he could not go to an industrial tribunal. Instead, he is suing Haringey in the county court for wrongful dismissal and breach of contract. If the case goes to trial, it will be the first to publicly challenge discrimination against HIV-positive employees, and Morgan is determined that the issue should be fully aired. Quote, "It will be an important test where the law stands on this. Many who have suffered this kind of discrimination don't want to go public about it, but I have nothing more to lose. My home is getting repossessed. I can't find another job," Morgan said. No one actually knows how many people have been fired in the UK because they are HIV positive or have contracted AIDS. According to Petra Wilson, a lecturer in law at Nottingham University who has researched cases of discrimination for the National AIDS Trust, said, quote, "It's very easy for an employer to claim someone was fired for work reasons. It can be very subtle, like putting an employee in a position where they have to take an HIV test." End quote. She believes the social stigma attached to the HIV status deters many from pursuing what rights they have under employment law. Others are pressured to simply leave. Roger Butler, who now works for the Sussex AIDS Centre, says his career as an administrator for a firm of solicitors ground to a halt when he started helping as a volunteer with an AIDS organisation in his spare time. Quote, "Immediately, people in my firm assumed, wrongly, that I was HIV positive myself. Having made a lot of progress in the first 2 years, I started receiving poor work assessments and found myself being moved sideways. Towards the end, 2 pages of a client's report went missing, only to be found near my desk. It was just like what happens in Philadelphia." End quote. When he handed in his resignation, he was given 4 weeks' money and told to leave immediately. Quote, "I was escorted off the premises by security guards." End quote. Barrister Bernard Richmond, who is a voluntary lawyer for the Terence Higgins Trust, says, quote, "Most cases involve people being fired for spurious reasons, and we basically try to disprove the claims of the employer. I have taken some cases to the Industrial Tribunal, but they have not been fought on the basis of HIV discrimination. The idea may make good cinema, but I don't think it's the right approach. Basically, my role is not to make a big issue of that, but to win and get financial compensation for the client. Industrial tribunals are held in public, and people do not want their illness openly discussed, which is why AIDS discrimination might not be mentioned at all, even though this is what, in reality, a case is all about." End quote. Oh, do you know, what's really hard to kind of wrap your head around is, and I think Todd Shuttleworth mentioned this himself in the previous episode, that at these times, you know, men and women that were facing these HIV/AIDS discrimination cases and were having to fight them at a time when HIV/AIDS was a guaranteed death sentence, you don't know how much longer you've got left, and you're having to spend what little time you do have left fucking fighting these claims with employers when essentially all they had to do was not be fucking arseholes. It's as simple as that. Then, on the 24th of March 1994, the Guardian newspaper, under the headline, "AIDS Victim Sues," go on to report, David Morgan, 35, a former security supervisor at the London Borough Council of Haringey, has won the right to go to court alleging he was harassed and discriminated against because he was gay and HIV positive. Oh God, this sounds like a pre-fight warm-up, no? He's having to fight to be able to argue, to be able to bring the case to court in the first place. Oh, it's just madness. Anyhow, then The Independent on the 26th of May 1994, under another photograph of David sat on the sofa of his home, ran the headline, "Council Stalls HIV Sacking Claim," where they report, a gay man who claims he was sacked for being HIV positive and is suing for wrongful dismissal believes his former employer, Haringey Council, is delaying proceedings so he becomes too ill to fight the case. David Morgan was a security supervisor in a block of flats in Wood Green. In July 1992, the council refused to convert his 6-month probationary contract into a full-time post. Haringey contends that Mr. Morgan used the telephone to excess, did not get along with colleagues, and was inappropriately overt about his sexuality. Mr. Morgan maintains that he was discriminated against on the grounds of his sexuality and medical condition, and that Haringey has breached its own codes on sexual harassment. The council is an equal opportunities employer. He says he used the telephone to seek guidance from his superiors and was ostracised by fellow employees after he complained about a superior who repeatedly made homophobic remarks and who was subsequently suspended. Mr. Morgan is also at a loss to know what he did that was, quote, inappropriately overt, end quote. Shortly after his job ended, Haringey sued Mr. Morgan to recover money advanced for a travel card. When he requested that his case be re-examined, he was turned down. Last year, he began legal proceedings against the council. Mr. Morgan is claiming wrongful dismissal and damages for breach of confidentiality as his colleagues learned he was HIV positive and homosexual, allegedly from one of his managers after he sought counselling. However, despite several preliminary hearings, the case is unlikely to reach court for judgment until September, as the council are refusing to disclose documents from a disciplinary meeting at which his sexuality and conduct were discussed. Mr. Morgan's solicitor will again attempt to obtain the papers at Ilford County Court on July the 4th. Yesterday, Mr. Morgan, 35, accused the council of delaying proceedings in the hope that he will drop the charges or become too ill to fight the case. He recently spent several days at a nursing home recovering from a serious chest infection. Quote, "If Haringey are so confident that everything they did was correct, then they should produce the paperwork. I have nothing to hide," he said. Quote, "This case is placing me under considerable stress, and HIV and stress don't go well together. I am prepared to meet them halfway, to sit round the table and discuss this, if they are prepared to do the same." End quote. Deborah Prance, Mr. Morgan's solicitor, said the council was also at fault for not following the correct disciplinary procedures. A spokesman for Haringey said the parties disagreed as to which documents were relevant to the case. To disclose certain papers would compromise the confidentiality of other council employees, she said. Oh, the irony. Quote, "We are anxious to settle this matter. It has been going on for 2 years, and it is too late to resolve this anywhere but in the courts." End quote. Then, a couple of weeks later, on the 6th of June 1994, the same newspaper, The Independent, follow up on David's story, where they report, "HIV man in sacking row gets new job." An HIV-positive man suing one council for unfair dismissal has been made the deputy mayor's escort for another. David Morgan from Ilford says Haringey sacked him because he is gay and HIV-positive. The council is contesting his claim. Last month, in the independent newspaper London, he accused Haringey of delaying the case. Now he has been appointed to assist John Fairley Churchill in his duties as Redbridge's deputy mayor. Mr. Morgan said, quote, "I am very proud. There is a lot of contempt for people with HIV, and it is nice to see Redbridge Council is prepared to take this positive step." End quote. But he emphasised that he had taken the job to support the Labour councillor and not to campaign on AIDS matters. Oh, can't help but think he's been told to say that. And on the 13th of August 1994, David penned a letter to the Guardian newspaper, deeply moved by an article published 3 days earlier, which highlighted the plight of a man using the alias Graham. Graham, working diligently for a local authority, found himself isolated, lacking support from his union during a challenging time. David resonated with the struggles of those navigating the complexities of their work environments without proper representation. Through his letter, David wrote, "I am an unemployed member of Unison, Haringey branch. I was dismissed in July 1992 from a housing position. Haringey Council has confirmed in writing that the work reasons used to dismiss me were either untrue or insignificant. However, there was a question mark about sexual conduct, which was never revealed at work appraisals. This smear and innuendo has prevented me getting other employment. I am gay and HIV positive. Haringey Council's Equal Opportunities policy states that, quote, gay employees are allowed to be open about their sexuality in all circumstances, end quote. Apparently, allegations were made that I was, quote, inappropriately overt, end quote, about my sexuality, and colleagues complained. I was never given a chance to defend myself, contrary to the council's grievance procedure or sexual harassment code. I sympathise deeply with the person in the story written by Paul Cable. I have only had one letter written on my behalf by my union in 1992, then known as NALGO. Since then, the branch secretaries have refused to meet me. I am now suing Haringey Council for breach of contract and wrongful dismissal. There is also a claim for breaching confidence of my HIV status. My whole working life has come to a halt. Thankfully, I have public support from the Labour administration at Redbridge Council. I am the Deputy Mayor's escort, the National AIDS Trust, Terence Higgins Trust, Lesbian and Gay Employment Rights, Chris Smith MP, Labour Campaign for Lesbian and Gay Rights, and over 70 tenants who I worked for in Wood Green and who want me reinstated. But Unison should hold their heads in shame. In my opinion, they have broken trade union principles in not representing a member and fighting victimisation and harassment of members whose lives may be ruined like ours has. David Morgan, Ilford, Essex. 14 months roll by when The Independent on the 10th of October 1995 run the headline, Compensation for Sacked Gay Council Worker, where, they report, a security worker who claimed he was sacked by a London local authority because he was gay celebrated last night after winning compensation from the council. David Morgan, 36, a former security supervisor at a block of council flats, said he was victim of anti-homosexual discrimination when he worked for Labour-controlled Haringey Council. Mr. Morgan from Ilford, Essex, who has lost his home and car in the course of his 3-year fight against the council, claimed he was wrongfully dismissed from his £15,000 a year job because colleagues told him they did not wish to work with gay people who were HIV positive. He started working for Haringey in January 1992 as senior concierge and security supervisor at a housing block on a small estate in Wood Green, North London. He quickly clashed with another concierge who became abusive when he found out Mr. Morgan was gay. Mr. Morgan invoked the council's disciplinary procedure to have the man suspended, and the colleague was disciplined for gross misconduct. But days after this ruling was served, Mr. Morgan himself was sacked. Haringey said he was incompetent. It was alleged he needed too much supervision. He failed to act on instruction, and he had developed poor working relationships with other members of staff. Because he had only worked for the council for 6 months, 18 months short of the statutory minimum period required to claim unfair dismissal at an industrial tribunal, he was forced to take his case before a court. In his fight with the local authority, Mr. Morgan, who now keeps his home address secret, argued that competence was not the issue and pointed to a string of irregularities in his case. Not least among these, he argues, were vague allegations that he had been, quote, inappropriately overt, end quote, about his sexuality. After accepting the money paid into Central London County Court by the council, which still denies liability, he said, quote, I feel that I have had a moral victory, and I feel the council has admitted liability. I hope it encourages other people to do the same thing. It has taken 3 years, but it was worth it because maybe it will stop other unscrupulous employers from discriminating against gay people. It is still not illegal to discriminate against people on the grounds they are gay. I just hope that Haringey Council has an investigation into the whole affair. It has cost the council about £40,000 to fight this case. I won't see a penny of the £2,100 it paid into the court because it will all be taken up with legal fees. End quote. Right, 1995. Let's see what the value is in 1995. Bank of England, £2,100. So as of April 2025, it's the equivalent of £4,253.53. You've got to ask, after 3 years, £4,253. Oh man, David, you should have gotten a hell of a lot more. But I think he's basically saying it's not about the money, it's just about the principle of the matter. So, well done, David. What a ledge. The end of the matter? Not quite, because just over 2 months later, on the 22nd of December 1995, London's Evening Standard newspaper ran the headline, Payout number 2 claimed over sacking, where, they report, a council caretaker who claimed he was sacked because he was gay has launched a new legal fight to clear his name, accusing his former boss of branding him a racist. David Morgan, 36, won £2,100 compensation from Haringey Council, alleging he was wrongfully dismissed after colleagues said they did not want to work with gays who were HIV positive. The Labour-controlled council said he was incompetent. Now he is suing the borough for defamation, along with Human Resources manager Roger Melling, over allegations that he was prejudiced against blacks. And with this claim, things move a little quicker, given the Daily Telegraph on the 9th of July 1996 ran the headline, Racism slur was really a typing error, where, they report, a homosexual council caretaker was paid undisclosed libel damages by a Labour council yesterday over a misprint which suggested he was racist. David Morgan, 37, was dismissed from his £18,000 a year post as a senior concierge with Haringey Borough Council in 1992 for alleged incompetence. 3 years later, he won a £2,100 damages agreement after claiming he was sacked because of his sexuality. But a letter from the council's Human Resources manager Roger Melling to the then opposition group leader Roger Dix said Mr Morgan was sacked because he could not get on with, quote, black caretakers, end quote. The High Court heard yesterday that Mr Melling had meant to write block caretakers. The letter said, quote, he could not get on with staff such as black caretakers and that he improperly removed, disseminated and falsified pages from a council notebook, end quote. David Price, counsel for Mr Morgan, told the court that even allowing for the misprint, the first allegation had been withdrawn by the council, while its own inquiry had found nothing improper in the second. Both Mr Melling and the council denied implying racism, saying the allegations were published inadvertently and in good faith. They agreed to pay damages, believed to be £6,000, and costs. Right, let's see how much £6,000 is in 1996. £6,000 according to the Bank of England. So as of April 2025, £6,000 would be £11,865.21. Oh wow, that sounds better, no? It's a better form of compensation. Outside court, Mr. Morgan of Green Lane, Ilford, said, quote, "I have not undertaken this action for money, but to clear my name of the smear of racism and of falsifying documents. This victory completely vindicates me. No wonder I have had difficulty getting other employment when these libels were on my file." End quote. Oh, well done, David Morgan. Absolutely amazing. How he lasted and stuck that out is, pure guts and determination. So, well done. And not with one, but 2 claims. And in a bid to uncover David's next steps, particularly in relation to the HIV/AIDS virus during this period, I turned my attention to the death records. To my relief, I found no accurate record, confirming that David was still very much alive and active. With a little research and a necessary reminder to myself not to assume every outcome results in death, I discovered David was writing to newspapers on political matters up until 2001. This perhaps indicates that with the introduction of effective combination HIV therapy in 1996, David was able to prolong his life if he adhered or taken on the prescribed medications known as ART, antiretroviral therapy. The advancements in treatment during this period marked a significant turning point in HIV management, enabling individuals to live longer and healthier lives. However, by 2001, there is no further trace of David beyond Ilford, London, leaving his current status uncertain. It is my hope that David is thriving and successfully navigating life while living with HIV. And David, if you're out there, drop me a line. We would love to hear from you and discuss more about your journey. So yeah, but well done to David. Amazing. Oh, what a hero. You can check out and read all the newspaper articles mentioned in this episode, along with extra snippets of information, on the Extra T blog. You can find the link in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Until the next episode, you can find me on Instagram at The Lost Boys of Soho.